When it comes to so-called cinematic looking images, nothing, and let me repeat this, nothing comes close to what a Hasselblad X-Pan with its super wide aspect ratio can deliver. Except maybe the Fujifilm TX1, but that's essentially the same camera, or more accurately, the X-Pan is the same camera as it was made by Fuji and rebranded as a Hasselblad back in the 90s. For the better part of 5 years, I owned a Hasselblad X-Pan and I absolutely loved it. As some of you might remember, I filmed plenty of videos wielding my X-Pan on the streets. Feel free to check those out if you haven't already. I also made 2 zines featuring street photography captured with my X-Pan. One is long gone, but a few copies of the second one are still available. The X-Pan remains one of my all-time favorite cameras, but after a repair and service that dragged on for over a year and resulted in a very steep bill, I had to part ways with it. According to the Hasselblad technician, it is pretty much only a matter of time before the circuit board or the shutter will fail. I saw firsthand his desk covered with disassembled X-Pans, used only for spare parts, and that wasn't reassuring. Since selling my X-Pan, I've dreamed of owning a digital equivalent. Hopefully that will become a reality someday, so fingers crossed. In the meantime, I've tried to emulate the X-Pan experience using the crop mode on my Lumix S5, which provides the exact same aspect ratio. It was fun, but it didn't quite replicate the feeling. The RAW files remained uncropped, which made the experience less authentic, unless I shoot in JPEG, which I normally never do. Shooting in black and white is a similar story. You can always convert photos in post, but the true black and white experience only comes from film or dedicated monochrome cameras. I explained this in a video where I used the Leica Q2 monochrome. Some people don't understand it, which is fine, but if you know, you know. Last year, I tried again to emulate a digital X-Pan using an anamorphic lens. The results were fantastic, but there was an issue. The lens I used was designed for APS-C sensors, and while it almost covered full frame, it didn't quite make it, so I had to crop the images to make them work. Not ideal. Full-frame anamorphic lenses were available, but most weighed over a kilo, and I wasn't willing to lug around that kind of weight, to be honest. That's where this little beauty comes into play. The Sirui Saturn 35 T2.9 lens. It's technically a cinema lens, which is why it uses T-stops instead of f-stops, but it's essentially an f2.8 lens. Sirui sent me this to test out, but they are not paying me or they won't see this video before it goes live. Despite being made for filmmaking, as you can see right now, this lens is also fantastic for photography. And this is what I want to focus on in this episode, as I'm still searching for the perfect X-Pan alternative. At just 400 grams, the Saturn 35 is the lightest anamorphic full-frame lens available. It achieves this by combining metal, glass and carbon fiber. I've never seen this in a lens before, to be honest. Pair it with a compact full-frame camera like the Lumix S9 and you get a system that actually is lighter than the X-Pan body itself. Granted, the lens is larger than its rangefinder counterpart, but that's to be expected. For the X-Pan, you had 3 lens options. There was the standard 45mm, the 90mm and the legendary 30mm wide-angle lens, which I was lucky enough to try out in Istanbul. I mostly used the 45mm, but it always felt a bit too narrow for my liking. As of today, the Sirui Saturn anamorphic lineup also consists of 3 lenses. This 35mm that I'm testing here, a 50mm and a 75mm on the long end. All 3 have a minimum aperture of T2.9, which is excellent. And this lens might just be the answer to my X-Pan dreams. So let's see how it performs. As I mentioned earlier, the Sirui Saturn 35mm is constructed from metal, glass and carbon fiber, giving it a solid and premium feel. The aperture ring is smoothly dampened and declicked, which is standard for a cinema lens, while the front positioned focusing ring is equally well dampened and satisfying to use. Overall, the build quality of the lens is excellent and feels truly high-end. The anamorphic lens I tried last year, designed for APS-C sensors, had a squeeze factor of 1.5, meaning the resulting image was 1.5 times wider than the native aspect ratio of the sensor. By comparison, the Sirui Saturn 35mm has a squeeze factor of 1.6, producing images that are 1.6 times wider than the standard 3:2 aspect ratio. This effectively transforms your sensor into one that's approximately 58mm wide, which comes remarkably close to the Hasselblad Xpan's iconic 65x24mm negative size. To fully match that width with an anamorphic lens, you'd need a 1.8 times squeeze factor, but such lenses are significantly larger and heavier. The Sirui 35 strikes a great middle ground, delivering results that closely resemble what the Xpan can achieve. Alright, so what it's like shooting this lens. Basically it's the same as any other lens. You set your aperture and you focus your lens, and then you frame your shot, of course, and then you take the shot. But there's more to the story, but let me show you. When you shoot with an anamorphic lens, the image looks kind of squished together, as you can see when I hold my hand in front of the camera. It looks kind of strange. Fortunately though, almost every modern Lumix camera has a built-in de-squeeze functionality that you can activate in the menu. But let me show you. So if I now go into the menu. In the menu, you can turn on anamorphic de-squeeze, and then you can choose from several squeeze factors, ranging from 1.3 up to 2.0. But there is no option for 1.6. That isn't an issue at all, because 1.5 times is close enough, and this won't affect the resulting photos at all, since it's only a preview. Now I select 1.5 and leave the menu, and now you can get an idea what the de-squeezed photo will look like. By using this, it's way easier to frame your shot. That is great news, isn't it? Well, there's a catch. And the catch is that this works in video mode when you're filming. As soon as you switch over to photo mode, it's not working anymore. So the de-squeeze function is turned off, which is very unfortunate. This is most likely a firmware limitation and something Panasonic could easily address. Another improvement I'd love to see is for RAW files to open already de-squeezed in software like Lightroom. I'm not sure if this is feasible, but it would streamline the workflow and make the process much more enjoyable. However, if you prefer, you could also use an external monitor for a de-squeezed preview. This not only provides a larger screen to compose your shot, but also lets you see the correct image before taking it. However, this setup adds bulk, and personally, I wouldn't use one. The good news is, over time, you get used to framing with a squished image and it becomes easier. Also typical for a cinema lens, the Saturn 35 has no autofocus. The Sirui Saturn 35mm is a manual focus lens only, much like the Xpan. However, the distance markings are positioned on the sides of the lens barrel. This means you can't easily see the focus distance while looking down at the lens. You need to check from an angle. This isn't a big deal during the day, but it can be trickier and harder to see at night. To make focusing easier, I attached an aftermarket focus tab. With the lens stopped down for zone focusing, I rarely need to check the distance anymore, and suddenly the lens feels almost like a rangefinder prime. One limitation of the lens is the focus distance, which is 0.9 meters. On rangefinder cameras, the typical minimum focus distance is 0.7 meters, so I wish the Sirui could focus a bit closer. However, if you need to get closer, you can use diopter lenses, which are inexpensive and easy to attach. However, diopters are more suited for controlled environments, such as portraits for instance, and less practical for street photography. So now you have captured your images, and for post-processing, there's one additional step to achieve the final result. And here's my typical workflow. I start by reviewing the photos in Lightroom and select my favorites. Next, I apply one of my presets, link is in the video description, and export the images as TIFF files. From there, I open the TIFF files in Photoshop and adjust the aspect ratio. To do this in Photoshop, open the image size dialog, unlink the width and height to allow independent adjustment. Switch the unit from pixels to percentage, enter 160 for the width, reflecting the 1.6 squeeze factor of the lens, and confirm. That's it. You now have your de-squeezed image. To save time, I've created an action in Photoshop that performs all these steps with a single click and saves the image automatically. If you're using an alternative to Photoshop, the process should be quite similar. Most editing apps allow you to adjust image dimensions or ratios in a comparable way. And what about image quality? Well, anamorphic lenses are not typically known for optical perfection. In fact, they often exhibit significant distortions and a lack of sharpness, which are considered part of their charm. However, the Sirui Saturn 35 stands out as fully usable when shot wide open, and its performance improves noticeably when stopped down. One thing you'll likely notice is the distortion along the edges of the frame. While it's visible if you're specifically looking for it, it's not something that stands out in real-world shooting situations. I see this as character rather than a flaw. And in my humble opinion, clinically sharp, optically perfect lenses can feel sterile, and I much prefer a lens with a bit of character. Also, when it comes to image quality, there's another factor to keep in mind, because one significant advantage of using an anamorphic lens over simply cropping your image is that you retain the full resolution of your sensor. While modern high-resolution cameras can make cropping less of an issue, it's still nice to preserve all 24 megapixels of the Lumix S9 sensor instead of cropping it down to something like 15 megapixels. Another factor to keep in mind is that anamorphic lenses produce a specific kind of flare. Those signature horizontal streaks of light often seen in movies shot with anamorphic lenses. Personally, I find these flares to be incredibly appealing. With the Sirui Saturn 35mm, there are two options to choose from. There's the neutral coating, like in this one here, where the lens flare takes on the color of the light source, and that makes it very flexible, I would say. But you can also get the blue coating, which produces the classic blue anamorphic lens flares. What I appreciate most is how well controlled the lens flares are. You need a very bright light source to produce them, so they won't show up in every image. This makes the lens flares feel more intentional and adds to the overall cinematic look without being overwhelming. So in conclusion, how close are we to a digital X-Pan? Even without a camera featuring a wider than typical 3:2 aspect ratio, it's already possible to create cinematic X-Pan-like images with the right tools. Compact lenses like the Sirui Saturn 35 provide a fantastic way to achieve this aesthetic. But one feature that would make the whole process even better is the convenience of a de-squeezed live view for photography. While this functionality is already available for video, as we've learned, it's now up to the camera manufacturers to extend the same capabilities to stills, which would greatly simplify composing an image. Alright, I plan to use this setup more frequently in the upcoming weeks, hopefully with better weather conditions and in a variety of environments. To see that, stay tuned. And as always, if you liked the video, you know what to do, smash the like button. If you want to check out the lens, I'll put the link in the video description. And yeah, I hopefully see you very soon in the next one. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.